call on the representative of Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation is compelled to take the floor to exercise its right of reply in response to the outrageous remark by South Korea. We categorically rejected this absurd and even provocative remark. This remark reminds us of the catchy phrase, "A burglar is sounding a burglar alarm." At the present, due to increasingly undisguised hostile policy of the United States and confrontation mania of the ROK ruling force, the situation on the Korean Peninsula is coming closer to the possible outbreak of a thermal nuclear war. In April this year, the United States and ROK codified their choice and actions through the announced Washington Declaration, aimed at enhancing the operability of extended nuclear deterrence against my country. The United States and ROK has been frequently staging joint military exercises of aggressive nature by mobilizing all sorts of nuclear assets, such as nuclear aircraft carriers, submarines, and nuclear strategic bombers, under the pretext of offering extended deterrence. In addition, they put into operation the Nuclear Consultative Group and deployed a nuclear submarine loaded with strategic nuclear weapons for the first time in 40 years. Such military provocations of the US and ROK constitute a most direct threat to the security of not only the DPRK, but also all other Northeast Asian countries. It is utterly deceptive to argue that the massive joint military drills involving all possible war resources are annual and defense-oriented. Which country on earth would believe that the scaled-up joint drills taking place under the war plans of occupation of a capital city, annihilation, and decapitation are defense-oriented? Which country on earth would sit idle in the face of aggressive nuclear strike means and outbursts of the alleged end of regime? Can aggressive war drills and deployment of nuclear strategic assets be compatible with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development? Falsehood cannot be enforced into truth, and a wrong formula will not make a correct answer. On the other hand, the DPRK's launch of a military reconnaissance satellite is a corresponding countermeasure in response to military threats of the US and its vessel forces, which have already overstepped the limit. It is also a justified exercise of the right self-defense to defend the sovereignty and territorial integrity. Peace and security on the Korean Peninsula is not guaranteed by any resolution devised by the political machinery of the United States and its vessel forces, but by powerful self-defense capabilities of the DPRK. The international community should have a microscopic look at the situation on the Korean Peninsula and must categorically oppose and reject destabilizing actions of the United States and its vessel forces. We are closely watching provocative rhetorics and demonstrative military action.
Hi, everyone. So vassal forces, I think he's referring to South Korea as vassals. He's claiming South Korea are vassals of the United States. So that's all the earliest, the latest that I could find on YouTube of statements by the representatives of North Korea in the United Nations this morning when I was searching on YouTube to find something from the North Korean embassy legation in New York City at the United Nations to find something where they have spoken to United Nations bodies. And this is the latest things I could find from September 2023, late September. Apparently, North Korea has not said much, if anything, about what's going on in Palestine and the Gaza Strip, which began 2 weeks after this September 26th statement. But yeah, that's what appears on YouTube. So you can see it says the Democratic People's Republic of Korea first right of reply, and replying to apparently a statement by the Republic of Korea representatives to the United Nations General Assembly at this time. And so what is this first right of reply? What is that? What is that? Well, of course, you can find answers to anything if you go to the internet and click on this and make sure that you can see this. So we just go to share screen here, and you can see here is the rules of procedure of the UN General Assembly, United Nations Rules of Procedure. And it states here, let me look up right of reply, there it is, right of reply. The delegation should exercise their right of reply at the end of the day whenever two meetings have been scheduled for that day and whenever such meetings are devoted to the consideration of the same item. So apparently that is what North Korea is exercising, its right of reply to the South Korean statement. So how about we do a little exercise? How about I ask you, imagine role play that you are individuals representing South Korea at the United Nations, and you would like to reply to what the North Korean representatives have just said. And so you have limited time. You have a short period of time. You can't speak for, it says, more than 10 minutes, or 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes to respond to what the North Korean delegate just said. So you are representing South Korea, and I would like you, therefore, to break up into groups and breakout rooms. And see, we have 9 people. So if we assign you to 3 different groups here, assign automatically, and prepare your ideas for an opening statement in response to reply to the North Korean representative, and so please join your rooms. And okay. Okay, so you can all hear me. So imagine you are going to, because you have to reply now, you have to reply to what the North Korean representative has said. And let's assume you're going to make a statement to the media, to maybe social media, because everything is posted on social media, on YouTube these days, and it's necessary in this internet period, this time, to reply right away in order to try to shape and control the narrative that's being propagated through social media. So how would you respond to what the North Korean representative has said? So let me go back to the North Korean representative, and let's hear the rest of what he has to say while you listen. So
of the United States and ROK military hooligans. The US and the ROK warmongers must bear in mind that the alleged security alliance would turn into insecurity alliance if they continue to commit any provocation, infringing our sovereignty and territorial integrity, and undermining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. The dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. The DPRK reserves its inherent right to self-defense under the Charter of the United Nations and international law. We will resolutely and decisively respond to any threat to the national security, and we will proceed with what we have to do without interruption until the United States and its vessel forces will admit their wrong choice. On a separate note, Mr. President, Japan's discharge of nuclear contaminated water is a crime against humanity to bring about a nuclear disaster. At present, neighboring countries and the international community are watching with stern eyes Japan's nefarious act and ill-minded behavior of the supporting forces. It clearly shows the double face of Japan, which cries wolf over the alleged nuclear threat of neighboring countries and blowing trumpet about a nuclear-free world. If it is the nuclear-treated water, why doesn't Japan use it for industrial and agricultural purposes? Japan must stop once and for all the dangerous discharge of nuclear contaminated water, which seriously jeopardizes the security and safety of the humanity. I thank you, Mr. President.
So imagine you're going to comment, right? You're going to write a comment in response to to his statement. And so what would you write as a comment reply to his statement? So let me go back to Zoom and make sure I don't accidentally close the meeting here. So imagine you're going to write a comment in response on the comments section on YouTube, okay? And so prepare what your group would write as a comment reply on YouTube to that posted recording. And like I say, that's the most recent, that's the most recent recording available from somebody from North Korea at the United Nations that's available, I could find on YouTube. So what kind of comment would you write in response to him? And so we have 3 groups, and so with 3 people in them, so who's going to speak for the group? Let's ask Siri. Siri, so let me ask Siri. Siri, pick a number between 1 and 3.
It's 3.
So that means in room 1, Jiwoo Choi is going to speak for room 1. That means Yurim Lee is going to speak for room 2, and Choi Song Min is going to speak for room 3. Okay, so Jiwoo Choi for room 1, Yurim Lee for room 2, and Choi Song Min for room 3. So help them prepare and explain what you would write, what you would say or write in the reply section on YouTube to the in commenting on the North Korean statement. And let's see if somebody does something really good. If it's really good, you can send it to me, and I'll post it as a reply to the North Korean representative under my own account on YouTube, if it's good. So prepare your reply.
And safety of the human.
I now call on the representative of the Republic of Korea.
The floor. The delegation's right of reply to the statement delivered on the general debate by the representative of DPRK. Excuse me. Before exercising right of reply and listening to the representative of DPRK's today, I have to say that I do deeply regret that we here in this chamber have to hear the DPRK's repeated, illogical, and absurd allegations again.
Hi, Professor.
I can't.
Okay, what's your question?
We need your help
Okay.
because we don't know what the agenda is. Like, we don't know what to debate for.
Well, it doesn't mean an agenda. Okay, so here's what the Republic of Korea said. The North Korea reply. So let's hear what he has to say. So let me go back to the Zoom here and share the screen. And it's about the deployment of Washington Agreement between the United States, Japan, and South Korea to cooperate in defense against North Korea and share intelligence. And of course, the Americans, as you might remember, they sent a nuclear submarine to Busan. I think it's still there to respond to North Korea's escalating weapons tests and ballistic missiles tests.
Resist having to ask every member states in this room, do you agree Republic of Korea, fully democratized and economically prosperous, the country of the rule of law, the country significantly contributing to the SDGs goal, is the one who undermines the spirit and principle of UN Charter? Do you really believe, as DPRK claims, the Republic of Korea, together with the United States, conspires to provoke the nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula without reasons that will cause catastrophic casualties to be inflicted on Korean people and beyond? How many member states in this chamber are seriously aligned with the DPLK's false assertions? My answer is clear. Untrue. Absolutely incorrect. As a responsible government, it is our duty to protect the lives and safety of our people from the DPRK's military threats by maintaining a robust ROK-US combined defense and deterrence postures. ROK-US combined defense and deterrence posture, including our combined exercise and training, is in response to the DPRK's military threat. These exercises and training, long-standing, routine, defensive in nature. Also, our defense cooperation with the United States is in full accordance with the global non-proliferation regime, including the NPT, unlike DPRK. Let me reiterate that the DPRK is the only country in the world, I repeat, the only country in the world to have conducted nuclear tests in the 21st century and stands ready to conduct another nuclear test at any time. It continues to escalate tensions through an unprecedented level of provocations this year, including multiple ICBM launches and so-called satellite launches, and is openly threatening a preemptive nuclear attack against us. Lastly, I also have to mention that the issue of human rights in North Korea is intrinsically linked to the international peace and security. The North Korean regime funds its illicit weapons development program through human rights abuses, and such as forced labor. As such, the UN Security Council is justified in addressing human rights situations in North Korea. And that is why the majority of member states supported it. We urge North Korea to prioritize the betterment of its human rights situations and the well-being of its people instead of focusing on expanding its military capabilities. I thank you, Mr. President.
I call on the representative of Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Okay. You can, I tell you what, why don't you in your, do this correctly, please, so you can hear me. Okay, so you can all hear me now. So please, Jiwoo Choi and Yurim Lee and Choi Song Min, please type in your group's brief reply comments on that you're going to that you would post here on the comments section into the chat, and send them to me, and I will post them. I will look at them, and we'll vote on which one is the best one from among the three. So let me ask, so you need some more time? You need more time, Shigan? Or are you ready? Okay. Okay, so let me ask a series. Siri, pick a number between 1 and 3.
It's 2.
Okay, so Yurim Lee, Yurim, what comment have you prepared to post, to consider to have posted that I will post in response to the North Korean statement?
Above all, I agree with the statement of North Korea
You
because
agree?
yes, because it is no wonder from the North Korean perspective, they cannot help but concern about the danger from the nuclear water released by Japan. So yes, that's the biggest reason why I agree with the North Korea.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. Now that's interesting. Okay, so let me go back to the Zoom room here. So can you type that in and send it to me in the chat, or as it why don't you send it to me as an email? Send it to my email account, bendiniches@gmail.com. All right. That one sentence comment that you would send in, and then I will gather them up. So please type that in and send to my email account. Can you do that, Yurim?
For now,
Okay, so yeah, send it to me now, right now, as to my Gmail account.
okay.
And we used to have an application. Let me see if I can find it here. And okay, and so Siri, pick a number between 1 and 3.
It's 3.
Okay, so Choi Songmin.
Yes.
What did your group come up with? Can you read it out to me? Can you say it to me now?
North Korea has always had a political position against Japan's opinion. We think it is wrong to condemn North Korea's remarks as an anti-human crime regarding the discharge of nuclear contaminated water. We think it does not focus on anti-human crimes, but rather maintains a political position.
Okay, can you type that in and send to me to my Gmail account
Okay.
so I can have some text? And Jiwoo Choi, what did Group 1 come up with? Jiwoo Choi. Jiwoo Choi, unmute.
Yes.
What did you come up with?
Uh,
Or your group? Jiwoo. Jiwoo.
oh,
Jiwoo.
oh, we,
Sir, actually, we need more time because we did try to understand the agenda, but I think we didn't finish our debate, so maybe
Can you tell me, Jiwon, what do you what do you suggest?
no, I mean we actually we didn't really understand what we should prepare for it.
Just come up with a reply to post it on the comments section of YouTube. So one sentence.
You showed us the Korean delegate speaking part, so actually we just watched that part, and I think and about that part of the video, the Korean military should do the anticipatory self-defense, because the North Korea, they sent a lot of missile like last year and 2022 also. So we need to protect our nation. So in this perspective, I think we can understand the North Korean delegate speaking.
Okay, okay, so type that in and send that to me onto my Gmail account right now, if you could, please, as an email message.
Okay.
So let me see who has done that. So I got something from Iurim and Choi Songmin. And so let me copy paste this. So back to Zoom. And this is number one. Number two is here. And let me go back here to the inbox. And that has, this is number two. And put that in the chat, number two. And then waiting for Chi-Wan's to send me group one's statement. So those are the three statements. So go ahead and send it to me as an email message. And we're waiting for that to arrive. And then I can go to, I have my own personal subscription to Zoom, right? Because the university doesn't provide it because we don't have the pandemic anymore. And so I still use it. But, they used to have a polling function that you could use to do survey, poll people, ask their opinion right on Zoom. I don't think that's available in my subscription. I don't see it here. So I have to do it on Cyber Campus, okay? So you can see 1, 2, and so G1 is going to send me number 3. Oh, there it is, G1. And so let me see here, and we'll go to the chat and then send that. So you can see those are the three statements, 1, 2, and 3. And so what I want to do now is I'm going to go back to Cyber Campus, and we all did the attendance already, and set up a vote. And add a vote here on week 11. And again, put the date in like I always do here. Vote on reply to DPRK September 2023 comments on YouTube. And so we go here. And so a number 1 message that you're reading, number 2 message, and number 3 message. And post result, make it not anonymous. So I don't know if I could actually put in, this is a lot of text. I don't know if I can put this in. Let me see if this works. It's probably too much text. Let me see. Oh, maybe it does fit. Okay, it does fit. And then number 2 message, like this, and go back to number 2 message here. And number 1 message, I didn't think it would all fit, but it all fits on the Cyber Campus. So let me go like this. And here, and here like this, okay, and save, and say, you please vote in the next few minutes. So it's 10:24 now. Let's say you have to vote by 10:27 as to which one. Oh, I fucked it up. Damn it. I messed it up. I hit delete. I got to do it again. So like this. Vote on reply. Okay, yeah. So one more time. I got too excited by these exercises. They're too exciting for me. So like this. And so number 1 here, like this. Number 2 here. See, okay, to here, like this. And number 3 here, scroll down, number 3, like this. Okay. And I have to save. All right, so save, and you have, let me see, you have 2 minutes. So please vote 1, 2, or 3. Which of these three messages should I post under my name, under my registration, subscription to YouTube, in reply to the North Korean leader statements? So please vote. Oh, and I gotta make sure you can see this. So share screen here, share, and so you can see the screen now. Please vote. Which one do you want me to post under my
And-
name? Yes,
But I think that is not our class.
I did it in the wrong. Fuck. I messed it up again. Oh, sorry. Get too excited here. Vote. Let me do this one more time. Okay. Ugh. So one more time here. Sorry. Okay, so you can see it now, right? And yeah, so 10:30. We'll make it 10:30 this time. And yes, and make it purposeful. And so one more time. Did I? Okay, so go here. Let me see. Go one like this. Like this. Group 2 here. And group 3 here. Okay, so save. Okay, so now vote. And you have 1 minute. Which of these three do you like that I should post under my name in reply to the posted remarks from the DPRK representative? I'll post under my name, not under your name, under my name. One minute. So that's 6, but we have 9 people. That's 9. All right, 9. Oh, it's tied. It's tied. That means that I'll post all 3. Yes, that's what I'll do. I'll post all 3. Okay, so I'll go like that. Let me see if I can do this. I'll go like this. Go here. What happened to the I'm going back and forth between 2 different browsers. Okay, so I go to add a comment. Ta-da! And then go back to Zoom here without making sure I don't accidentally close the room. Like this. Okay. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. Like that. And I go here. And then 2. Aha. 2. And then go back to Zoom. And go 3. Okay, like this. Like that. Go like here. And then 3. Comment. Ta-da! I've commented. Hooray! So maybe North Korea will get back to me. With somebody will reply, maybe. We'll see. Okay. So that's a little introduction to the United Nations. Hooray, United Nations. So let's go back to Zoom here. And let me open up the week. Let's see, what else do I have here to highlight here? Let me see here. So the notes. Maybe we should look at the notes a little bit, huh? Even though they're kind of detailed and elaborate. So we click here on the notes, and so make sure I share the screen. Share screen, and you go here and share. And there you see the notes. Hooray! The notes. And you can see it says, the role of the United Nations, the grand design of the post-Second World War period. And when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, US and British leaders planned the formation of a new international system to preserve peace after all existing methods had failed. That's really sad. Yeah. By the way, I should point out to you, we get a lot of bad press for the League of Nations that was created after World War I, the League of Nations. But that's probably not fair. I mean, I have another link here that I can show you. Maybe one of the most well-known, renowned scholars of international law in the United Nations is a man named Richard Falk, who is quite old. He's in his 90s. He doesn't have much longer left on this world, but he's worked extensively with the United Nations, and particularly in the Palestinian issue. He's a Jewish American, but he's very much opposed to the abuse of the human rights of the Palestinians. And so let me just show you what I have for Richard Falk here, just to show you what he looks like. So let me click on that and then stop share and then go to share screen.
I think from the perspective of the ICJ, this is the most important decision it's ever made. And it has restored a certain kind of confidence that international procedures can sometimes reach clear results. And what made the decision, I think, so favorable and jurisprudentially significant is that on this very controversial set of issues, it reached near unanimity. That there was, I mean, the Ugandan judge is sort of an anomaly.
So you hear him say he thinks this International Court of Justice decision that called upon Israel to take measures to stop an unfolding genocide, he says it's the most important decision the ICJ has ever made, which is a pretty bold statement. And as I told you, he's a well-known figure in international law and human rights. And you can, if you go to the, I have another, if I can find it here without accidentally closing everything. What did I do with that? My lesson plan. I just had the lesson plan there. So is this the lesson? Okay, yeah. So stop share, make sure you share the screen again, go to Zoom. No, don't want to do that. And so go to Zoom here. No, that's not what I want. Cancel. Stop share, go back to share screen here and the lesson plan. And you see here that here is the Wikipedia entry for Richard Falk, which should open up. And I think you can see that. I'm not certain if you can see the same thing I can. So again, I'll just do the share screen again so you can see it here. And so there's the Wikipedia entry for Richard Falk. And he's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. And so you can see he's 93 years old. And he's done a lot of work on this area. And the reason I mentioned him is because he wrote of 20 books, right? He wrote a lot of books. And one of the books he wrote highlighted what the League of Nations attempted to do during the interwar period in trying to prevent what became World War II. And the first one of the major big crises that the League of Nations faced was when Italy invaded Abyssinia. Let me see what the Wikipedia has for the Italy invasion of Abyssinia. So you can see here, this is the Abyssinia crisis. Which was an international crisis in 1935, in which Mussolini's Italy took advantage of the situation to try to annex Ethiopia, what's today called Ethiopia, what was then called Abyssinia, in the 1930s. And the League of Nations put economic sanctions on Italy to stop Italy from conquering Ethiopia. And the sanctions really hurt Italy. The Italian economy was in deep, deep trouble as a consequence of the sanctions that the League of Nations put on Italy, on Mussolini's Italy, for invading Ethiopia and doing terrible things, using chemical weapons and the like. But then the League of Nations, the British and the French, I should say, ended the sanctions on Mussolini's Italy because they needed Italy to confront Hitler. When Hitler began making demands to add Austria to a greater Germany, because Austria, of course, was a country which emerged when the Austro-Hungarian Empire broke up at the end of World War I. You had this little country of Austria populated by German-speaking Austrians on the border with Germany, and Hitler's come to power and was demanding that the Germans, that Austria be added to Germany so that all Germans could live together in one big German country. And this is called the Anschluss, right? The Anschluss. Let me just type that in, Anschluss. And yeah, you can see this is what Wikipedia has for the Anschluss, the German term for the unification. And the French and the British thought they could get the Italians on their side against Austria because Italy would not want, they thought maybe Italy would not want Germany to just swallow Austria. And so they removed the sanctions on Italy because of this other crisis in Germany. And of course, later we would see that Mussolini would then ally with Hitler, but it wasn't clear that he was going to necessarily ally with Hitler at this point. But that's the point I want to make, that Richard Falk, in one of his books, he does explain that the League of Nations was not as ineffective as we portray it. You know, it's almost considered a joke, you know, today. And the economic sanctions that were put on Italy were pretty effective at the time. But then, you know, the League of Nations really wasn't set up to deal with a situation where you had these two new types of governments had emerged in Europe, fascist Italy and I think you can see this, fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. I mean, those two types of states, the world had not seen anything like that before. Maybe Napoleon's France from 130 years earlier might have been something like a fascist dictatorship. I mean, it's hard to say, according to what happened 230 years ago today, if you would consider Napoleon a fascist dictator in France. But I mean, that was a long time ago, right? And the League of Nations was set up to prevent an outbreak of World War I. Again, a repeat of World War I, which was a conflict which was between countries that were misperceiving aggressive intentions from each other, right? They viewed themselves as defensively motivated. They're only trying to protect their own interests, but they viewed their neighbor, whether it be Russia or Germany, if you're France, or Russia, if you're Germany or whatever, or that their neighbor was an aggressive actor that was trying to hurt them, trying to expand at their expense, threaten their identity, threaten their status. So World War I was a war based upon mutual misperception of threat, miscommunication, misunderstanding, fear, suspicion, paranoia that escalated under the pressure and panic after countries began mobilizing their militaries. They didn't want to be behind in that process because that was a complicated process involving millions of soldiers. And if you're not prepared for your enemy's attack, you could collapse because you had to have millions of men organized in defenses. And so, of course, as countries started mobilizing, that caused fear in other countries that they had to mobilize. So there was a lot of analysis of that in terms of how to prevent World War I type situation from happening again, that created the League of Nations. The League of Nations wasn't set up to deal with Hitler's Germany. An actor that was belligerent, not because it was fearful, an actor was belligerent because it saw a wonderful opportunity along with Germany and along with Italy and Japan to exploit the weakness and degeneracy and decadence that they saw all around them in France and in Stalin's Russia, Soviet Union, and in Imperial China, Republican China, that just waiting for Japan and Germany to take advantage of this wonderful opportunities because these other countries around them were degenerate and disgusting, right? States with weak, failed political economic systems that couldn't resist resurgent Germany. Sort of like what you could say Russia sees in Ukraine and in Moldova, but not Germany, for example. So I just wanted to mention that the League of Nations, the United Nations was set up in the shadow of the perceived abysmal failure of the League of Nations. And that's an oversimplification. The League of Nations just was unprepared for this new type of regime that we saw in Nazi Germany, right? And there was of course, that was a big focus of the new United Nations. As I mentioned, you know, the Charter of the United Nations makes explicit reference to the enemy states, right? The states that were still that they had been fighting in World War II. Germany and Japan. You know, by 1943, Mussolini's regime had collapsed and Italy had changed sides. So the focus was on Germany and Japan. As I mentioned, Germany and Japan today want that reference to so-called enemy states removed from the UN Charter, but you know, they can't get agreement to do that for whatever reasons. So, and of course, the United Nations was set up during World War II. There was the hope that, well, we'll modify the old system in the League of Nations to make it better, and we'll create a United Nations Security Council so that this great alliance, these allies against fascism, Soviet Union, United States, United Kingdom, and China and France will continue. We're cooperating today in fighting against fascism and Nazism and Japanese imperialism. Let's create a special institution where we can institutionalize and continue that cooperation that we have in fighting against the Japanese and the Germans. Let's make that cooperation permanent. Let's set up this United Nations Security Council. Yeah, let's call it the United Nations Security Council, where we'll institutionalize that wartime cooperation and collaboration and keep it going, right? And help, you know, create a better world through the experience of building upon the experience we have working together against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And of course, unfortunately, it didn't work as planned. Nothing works as planned, basically, right? But these are not, you know, these are bright people trying to get it right this time, the second time around with the United Nations. So the U.S. and the British leaders did most of the planning, and this was really something which appealed to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president of the United States at the time, right? And so they had two competing designs. The U.S. and the British did. The U.S. wanted to ban resort to military force in international relations, so you're supposed to only use force in defense, and promote the removal of the traditional system of old classical international law that removed unilateral action. You know, you're supposed to act collectively in a collective security system. Ideally, that would happen through the United Nations Security Council. Reduce the role of military and political alliances that can pull countries into wars, into conflicts because they have an alliance commitment. You can make that argument that that's an important issue regarding NATO today, right? That the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, you know, the 32 countries that belong to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, you know, they more or less really value the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So they want to defend the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for its own sake, because that's so important to them, right? And, you know, that's a big challenge now in Ukraine. Ukraine is under big pressure. The Ukraine is not a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but the United States and its allies have vested a lot of prestige and resources in defending Ukraine against Russia. And the concern is if Ukraine collapses, if Ukraine falls, that it's going to weaken the belief, the collective world belief that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a really strong alliance. That, you know, if Russia wins in Ukraine, it might think, well, I can attack, you know, Lithuania or Estonia or Latvia, because the NATO alliance members are not really going to defend it because they didn't defend Ukraine, and Ukraine's much bigger. And so there's that concern. So, you know, again, alliances are still really important, even though the hope was in the 1940s that we'd stop relying upon alliances, and the UN Security Council would be primarily responsible for dealing with security issues. And then the Cold War emerged just a few years after the UN began, and that pretty much marginalized the United Nations Security Council, but didn't get rid of it. But it made it didn't have the function that there was the big dream that it would have. And also reduce spheres of influence and balance of power. And of course, it didn't really work there as well, because, you know, you had the Soviet Union and its sphere of influence in Eastern Europe and in the communist bloc. And then, of course, balance of power became really strong again with nuclear weapons, right? That mutually assured destruction that was a view that basically you had to build up enough nuclear weapons that your enemy knew that even if he attacked you first with his nuclear weapons, he wasn't going to destroy them all, because there were so many of them that you would be able to hit back and destroy him. So mutually assured destruction, that would deter everybody from starting World War III. Again, that wasn't intended when the United Nations was first created in the mid 1940s. So instead, a universal organization consisting of peace-loving nations. Remember, international law traditionally talked about civilized nations. No, we're not talking about civilized nations anymore, because of course that term was used to justify empires, right? That Britain should have an empire because it's civilizing those backward black and brown people in Asia and Africa. And same with France. And so France and Britain are civilized nations. So that's imperialism is bad. You're not supposed to have empires anymore. Sooner or later, you got to give up your empire. So we're not going to talk about civilized nations. We're going to talk about peace-loving nations. Hooray, peace-loving nations. So within this universal organization, this United Nations, the U.S. plan emphasized institutionalization of the alliance of major power countries against the Axis powers. That was China, U.S., France, UK, and USSR, while UK and France still had huge colonial empires, which was a problem, right? I mean, the United States didn't really like having those empires, but the UK and France, they didn't want to give them up. This is how UK and France viewed themselves as, great powers in the world, because they control big parts of the world through their empires. But that's a problem if you really are trying to talk about universal freedom and self-determination. And what's your justification for having these huge empires? Why should France have an empire? Why should UK have an empire? If you're not going to basically claim that everybody else in the world needs to be civilized, and we're not talking about civilized nations anymore, right? And of course, the Soviet Union claims they're the main enemy against imperialism, for liberation of peoples from imperialism. And so that already was emerging as an issue, but the UK and the French would resist it, and it would cause big problems. It would cause big problems for the United States, right? Some of you, well, I don't know, we talk about this in the American history class, but the United States kind of let France get its empire back in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, in the mid 1940s, because the Americans decided in the Truman administration that if you force France to give up its colonial empire, that you would destabilize France politically at home in Paris, and make the French people more radical and maybe more willing to listen to the Communist Party of France. Because you're radicalizing them by humiliating them even more. They pretty much lost World War II, and now they're going to lose their empire. And so that's a big problem for the Americans, because the Americans are really starting to focus on the Soviet Union and the belief that, oh my God, the Soviet Union is a Russian version of Nazi Germany. And so we don't want to destabilize France, and we want to keep the British on our side too. So they stopped pushing that decolonization a focus so much, although the British had already agreed, to give up India in the late 1940s, but UK and France would stay in Africa until 1960, right? They would stay in some places past the 1960. I think, what did Britain leave? Bahrain, I think in 1972, one of the small little island Persian Gulf Arab kingdoms there. So, Portugal didn't give up what's called, what is it called? The little country in Indonesia, East Timor, right? They didn't give up East Timor until Indonesia took it from them in the 1970s. So, of course, the role of the United Nations was also to promote economic and social cooperation, so to ensure economic progress and better working conditions. Yay! Again, you want universal peace. You can't focus just on military issues through the Security Council. You got to promote justice. If you want peace, you have to promote justice, social, political, economic justice. So you got to talk about economic development. You got to talk about progress. You got to talk about human rights. If you want peace after 2 world wars, right? So the aims included avoiding future armed conflict due to dramatic economic inequalities, promote decolonization. You know, again, everybody kinds of accepts that they have to do that, but they don't want to also give up. The French and the British don't want to give up their empires, and the Portuguese as well, right? The Portuguese would not give up Angola and Mozambique until 1975. Until, you know, when I was a teenager, Portugal still had colonies in Africa, right? In Portugal and in Angola and Mozambique. Those empires are really important for nationalism, for Portuguese nationalism, for French nationalism, even for British nationalism. I mean, the British still, you know, I mean, it's hard to overemphasize the extent to which modern British nationalism is tied up with the belief in and the nostalgia of the glory of the British Empire, right? And, you know, that's one of the reasons why they like having a king, because the king reminds them, you know, that the king used to be not just king of Britain, of the United Kingdom, but king and emperor of the British Empire. So, so you have to promote decolonization. And again, the Cold War would get involved with this, because the Americans then came to believe that the Soviet Union was exploiting this desire for decolonization to promote its own imperialism, to promote its own Russian imperialism, but of course under the banner, the flag of communism and anti-imperialism, when it's still traditionally just Russian imperialism, but now with nice sounding ideological universal appeals to Marxist theory, right? So promote decolonization to achieve the principle of self-determination of peoples throughout the world as an ideological value. And we talked about that, how, for example, the African National Congress still today, a ruling party in South Africa, 30 years after the end of apartheid, still has a lot of sympathy for Russia, because the Soviet Union was a main backer of the African National Congress against the apartheid government in South Africa that ruled from 1948 until 1994. And so, you know, still there's a lot of sympathy for Russia in South Africa. And also, you know, South Africa has taken the lead in challenging what they view as this is European Jewish settler colony in Palestine at the expense of the brown Arab peoples, African and Asian peoples of the Arabs, in committing apartheid and now genocide against the Palestinian people, African and Asian brown people of that region, right? So this is not just a history lesson. This is still relevant today in 2024. You know, 150 years ago, you could be an imperialist. Yay, imperialism. Yay, we are civilizing people, a civilized nation, civilized. You can't say that today, right? Even if you believe it in your heart. So for also to promote decolonization for the political aim of lessening the potential for conflict through the existence of over 1 billion brown people resenting the domination of white minorities, claiming that they should dominate them because these brown people are backward. And C, for the economic aim of lessening, and of course the Japanese bought into this wholeheartedly when the Japanese started creating their empire, right? They copied the British, and they claimed that they were on their own civilizing mission. They're going to civilize these Koreans that they're occupying, supposedly, right? They just borrowed the European language, and then when they would conquer the French and British and Dutch possessions in Southeast Asia during World War II, they claimed that they were liberating those Asian people from white racist European imperialism by making them part of the Japanese Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, is how they called the Japanese Empire. The Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. I mean, this is a tendency that countries tend to do, right? They tend to explain and justify and cloak their foreign policies in broadly appealing ideological symbols. or religious symbols in the past, today an ideological symbol. So Japan is spreading its empire in the 1940s to create the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere to eliminate white racist European colonialism and imperialism in the Asian lands. Hans Morgenthau called this nationalistic universalism, right? Let me open up that file that I have here. Yeah, Hans J. Morgenthau was one of the founders of the international relations theory of realism. And so you can see here, make sure you can see this here. I show this in other classes, and I can't avoid showing it because it's just so important for understanding, for example, international law historically, right? He talked about nationalistic universalism, right? And so nationalistic universalism, state leaders will cloak the output of their country's foreign policy-making process in broadly appealing ideological religious symbols. So the United States talks about modernization. We can't talk about civilizing mission. We talk about modernization today. Like the United States is modernizing the Middle East. Or the Soviet Union talked about, spreading communism and socialism and advancing world revolution for socialist paradise, when it really was still traditional Russian imperialism when you look at their patterns of behavior. So therefore, this tells you a state's foreign policy motivations are never what the state leaders explicitly claim they are. Their propaganda is not accurate. It's propaganda. But if you believe their propaganda, you promote their national influence. If you're as an Italian or Korean or whatever, if you listen to what your American or Japanese or whatever it has to say, you basically become an American or Russian or Japanese nationalist. So again, so again, examples of nationalistic universalism at work. It depends upon what you see as the main challenges you confront in the world, right? In terms of 1940, the nationalistic universalism of Little Denmark, seeing a big danger from neighboring Germany. They talked about national self-determination. Denmark stands for national self-determination because they're under threat. They see a threat from big neighbor that wants to dominate and conquer and dominate them, right? In 1900, when Great Britain was a big power, number one, level power, it talked about civilizing mission, right? But then in 1988, during the Cold War, Britain is declining as a second-rate power, and it talked about national self-determination, hooray! Because it sees a threat from the Soviet Union. Is the Soviet Union going to end the Cold War in a violent and nasty way, right? So you can see, you get a sense of how a country perceives its world around it in terms of its main challenges, in terms of threat or opportunity, in terms of the propaganda they use. Because that tells you something about how they perceive, rightly or wrongly, the motivations of their main sources of challenge. The Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, the United States, in terms of the kind of propaganda they use. Their nationalistic universalism. So how would Morgenthau portray the Cold War, that dominated the world even before World War II was over? The Soviet Union, United States were thinking about the world after the Second World War. Today, we talk about modernization. Today, the United States talks about modernization, national self-determination, and so on, against a Russian perceived threat and a Taiwan perceived threat. A China perceived threat to Taiwan and America's allies in East Asia. So that's what America talks about. But in the past, we just were open about talking about civilizing mission, that we need to civilize these backward countries. The Soviet Union, when it was powerful, talked about spreading world revolution, advancing the dialectic, right? Through spreading Soviet Moscow's influence in the world. That's good for not just Moscow, it's good for the whole world by bringing about socialist revolution that will liberate the whole of humankind. Hooray! Advance the dialectic. But Morgenthau would say countries always do that, but you never believe what they say. What they say is important to know because you need to understand what their worldview is, and so study their propaganda. But it's self-serving propaganda, right? Okay, so just to go back to the notes here, And so, okay, so back to the notes here, and you can see, oh, that's not the notes. There are the notes. I think you can see that. There they are. Okay, so promote decolonization, and of course, the U.S. wants to promote free trade, and partly because it wants to strengthen its allies against communism by strengthening their economies under capitalism. Remember, capitalism and democracy didn't have a good record at this time. You know, the Great Depression happened in the capitalist world. The Great Depression was a capitalist production, and Hitler came to power through elections in Germany. So the United States, and of course, the Soviet Union is already promoting itself as an alternative model. So the U.S. also wants to promote economic development, not just because it's a nice country, but because it wants to strengthen its allies against Soviet communism and the appeal of that model. And also, the U.S. has a lot of money that it needed to do something with. I mean, the U.S. economy, it grew at least 80%. As during World War II, when the Soviet Union is being destroyed, millions are being killed in the Soviet Union, Germany's being bombed, Britain is being exhausted, France is occupied, China is being devastated. The United States is pretty much not touched by the damage of World War II. It lost, what, 400,000 soldiers. That's nothing compared to what the Soviet Union lost, 27 million, and its economy almost doubled in size during World War II. So the U.S. has got a lot of money that it wants to invest in other countries to make more money. The colonial powers had controlled the cheap labor and primary commodities in their colonies. So, you know, that was really important for the British economic development, was their empire. It was integrated into their economic development plans. And the same was true with the French. But now you're going to break up these empires, right? And but the breakup of the empire should be gradual, not abrupt. So, you know, for example, one of the six major, I think it's the six, there are six major bodies of the United Nations, and one is the UN Trusteeship Council, which was imagined to be a place where colonies would begin the process of becoming independent sovereign countries with the aid and assistance of the United Nations. And it's pretty much dormant, right? If I, you know, go back here, I showed you some of this when I was meeting with you in my office, right? The UN Trusteeship Council is pretty much no longer working. It's one of the six principal organs of the United Nations. So let me just show you this, remind you of this, right? Which, but it was one of the six major original organs of the United Nations, along with the Security Council, the General Assembly, the International Court of Justice, the Human Rights Commission, and so on. It was one of the major, because it was supposed to help decolonize the European colonies. And it's pretty much done, right? It says here, the last was Palau, formerly part of the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, which became a member state of the United Nations in December 1994. And it's pretty much doesn't do anything anymore. But just to show you, decolonization was really important in the 1940s. And the struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union and their allies was very much tied up with decolonization, right? And so just to show you that, that's a pretty much dormant body that doesn't do anything anymore in the United Nations system. So back to the notes. And so screen share and go back to the notes here and share. And I think there you go. There are the notes. Okay. So the British scheme that Winston Churchill, the prime minister during almost all of the war, promoted was promoting world security through regional arrangements under a world council. So in other words, trying to maintain their empires with regional arrangements. I mean, you really wanted to maintain the British Empire because, again, I mean, they knew the United States is another class of power. I mean, it's a superpower. That was a term that some journalists developed to describe what the world was going to look like after World War II. With the Soviet Union and the United States being the superpower, Britain was a winner in World War II, but Britain was important in the world because of the British Empire, right? Or the legacy of the British Empire. And they're still trying to deal with that legacy today, right? Some of you, Yurim is in my European Politics and Society class. We talk a lot about British nationalism and British identity and Brexit, leaving the European Union. You can't explain that unless you understand this romantic nostalgia legacy and self-identity that British have with their empire, right? with the British Empire and its offshoots, the United States. So the U.S. plan dominated the new system because it was by far the most powerful state in international relations immediately after the war. So the U.S. rule plans became dominant, but the U.S. still had to compromise with the United Kingdom regarding the issue of colonialism, partly because France also wanted to cling to its empire following its humiliation during the Second World War. And this would set the stage for one of the great American disasters, the Vietnam War. One of the great American foreign policy disasters, the Vietnam War, because the United States compromised with France to let France keep its Vietnam and its empire because the Americans didn't want to potentially destabilize France back home in Paris by humiliating them further by making them give up their empire. And so the Americans would support the French in trying to maintain their empire, and then the French would lose anyway, and the Vietnamese nationalists went to the Soviets and the Chinese for help against the French and the Americans, and that shifted America's view of the Vietnamese nationalists as being basically servants of and clients of Moscow and Beijing. And that would lead the Americans to get involved in the Vietnam War and lose after killing, directly or indirectly, millions of people. So the USSR played a comparatively, I don't know. I mean, Harry Truman was president of the United States. I don't know what would have happened if Roosevelt had lived. I mean, we knew he wasn't going to live. He was very sick when he was reelected in 1944. Everybody knew he wasn't going to make it. But, Roosevelt knew he wasn't going to make it, and he selected Harry Truman to be his vice president. Would Roosevelt, if he had lived some years longer, would he make the French give up French Indochina? I don't know. People who like Roosevelt say, yeah, he would have done the right thing. He wouldn't have kept that empire. I don't know. He was the one who chose Harry Truman to be his vice president, knowing he pretty much wasn't going to make it. And he died just 4 months into his fourth term in April 1945, and Harry Truman became the president from 1945, and then would win election 1948 and would be the president during the Korean War. The Soviet Union played a comparatively small role in the establishment of the United Nations. It was vocal primarily on some political questions such as the veto power in the Security Council. So I guess it wanted to make sure that in this new UN, let me show you. So in this new UN charter, right, that the Security Council would have 5 permanent members, and they would have the right of veto. The Soviet Union had promised all 16 Soviet republics would participate in the founding of the organization. It proposed that it wanted Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Latvia, Estonia, that they should all be in the United Nations, but it settled on only having 3 countries in the United Nations, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. So they were technically already members of the United Nations before the Soviet Union broke up. And it upheld the principle of self-determination. That was the Soviet Union. So what about this UN Charter? Is the UN Charter in the news these days? Of course it is. Let me show you another video. So stop share. We go here. So this is from a couple days ago. Let me stop it here.
This is your mirror.
What the Israelis have done. It is ethnic cleansing. It's a purposeful.
Oh, hold a second.
What the Israelis have done.
Hold it.
It is ethnic cleansing.
Hold it. One second here.
Purposeful.
1 second here. Something happened there. So make sure.
This is your mirror. So that you can see exactly what you are inflicting upon the UN Charter.
So this is the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations commenting upon the UN General Assembly's vote to admit Palestine as a state in the United Nations. So right now, Palestine is only an observer. It has only observer status, like the Vatican. The Pope has observer status in the UN because the UN Security Council has to approve a new member state joining the United Nations. And the United States vetoed Palestine's application to join the United Nations last month. And so that was vetoed, but now the General Assembly decided to have a debate on this issue. And of course, it voted to approve, but it's not enough to bring Palestine in. But it's an embarrassing, humiliating, humiliating, maybe it might be a strong word, for the Americans and the Israelis who oppose Palestine being allowed into the UN, because the United States insists that first, there has to be negotiations between Israel and Palestine in establishing a peace treaty between them before the United States would ever agree to allowing Palestine to join the United Nations. So, of course, the UN General Assembly voted in favor anyway, because there's a lot of doubt about whether or not Israel has any intention of giving up the lands it's occupied and controls from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, that entire territory there, that they want to control that territory. So here you see the Gilad, what's his name? I can't remember. Israel's ambassador commenting upon UN General Assembly's vote overwhelmingly in support of Palestine being brought into the United Nations.
With this destructive vote, this is you are shredding the UN Charter with your own hands. Yes, yes, that's what you're doing, shredding the UN Charter. Shame on you. Thank you, Mr. President. This is your mirror. So that you can see exactly what you are inflicting upon the UN Charter with this destructive vote. This is you are shredding the UN Charter with your own hands. Yes, yes, that's what you're doing, shredding the UN Charter.
So he's kind of a clown, right? But he gets attention. So back to the notes. Okay, so the negotiations to create the UN gradually proceeded to agree on its fundamental tenets. The US and the United Kingdom drafted the Atlantic Charter in 1941, when the war is progressing. It's hard to believe, right? That I guess, again, you need to explain, why are we going to fight this war? And the Americans will not get involved formally into the war until December 1941, when Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. But the Americans are already supplying United Kingdom and the Soviet Union with a big amounts of economic and military aid through the Lend-Lease program. The Americans are already, technically, their Navy is fighting the German Navy to be able to supply Britain. The German Navy is targeting and sinking shipping to Britain to put a blockade on Britain during the war. So the US Navy is already at war, but technically, unofficially, with the German Navy. But even before the US enters the war formally in December 1941, they meet and they announce at the Atlantic meeting off the coast of Canada, what are we going to fight for? What do we want to, what is the purpose of this war? What better world are we going to try to create as we sacrifice thousands of people are going to die, including British and American soldiers? What for what purpose? And so that is the founding idea, framework for what became the United Nations. By December 1941, it became that was a turning point in the war, right? Hitler was stopped with big disastrous campaign. He was stopped outside of Moscow. The United States is formally into the war, and that's what the British desperately wanted. But it wasn't obvious then that was the turning point in the war. But it turned out that December 1941 was a turning point. Hitler's armies were stopped outside of Moscow, and the Americans were now in. By October 1943, it was pretty clear that, sooner or later, Japan and Germany are going to lose. This is going to be over sooner or later. And so at Moscow and in Dumbarton Oaks, which is in the state outside of Washington, D.C., from 21 August to 7 October 1944, and at Yalta 1945, without the participation of China, the UK, the US, and the Soviet Union begin to meet, I should say, to plan how are we going to organize the world after we get rid of these horrendous enemies, Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany? What are we going to put in its place? And the International Conference to work out and improve the UN Charter met in San Francisco. Again, Japan is still fighting the war. Japan fights until August 1945, right? August 1945. So the war is not over. The Allied powers presented a conference with the text of what became the United Nations to amend this, the UN Charter, I should say, the UN Charter. To amend this proposed charter, the rules of conference permitted amendments, and they acquired a 2/3 majority vote. The agreements among the Allied powers meant that only minor changes would be politically permissible. So, you could make a proposal, but the US and the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union had to support those changes. There's 50 states participants that gathered were those that the international community recognized, consisting of the 4 convening powers, which included China. And again, Franklin Delano Roosevelt gets credit for that, even though China's participation in the war was militarily was not impressive, right? The Japanese, they suffered horribly. 20 to 25 million Chinese died due to, aside from the Koreans, that died from Japanese imperialism. Horrible. Militarily, they didn't perform very well, but that's the same with the French. The French didn't perform very well either, right, in the war. But of course, China was China. China's big. And so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he accepted France and UK, and China as being one of the convening powers. 42 states, including India, were not yet independent. All states had declared war either on Germany or Japan. Belarus and Ukraine attended, but they did not have any recognition as independent states. Argentina and Denmark were there. You had to declare war on Germany and Japan if you wanted to be one of these founding member states. So Brazil, for example, declared war on Germany and Japan, and they actually sent a military unit to Europe at the end of the war to be involved. So, as being one of the founding countries. The charter, I don't think the convening powers didn't include, I don't think it included China. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted China to be on the UN Security Council as a permanent member. Right? He really pushed that. Let's bring up Gemini and ask Gemini. So let me ask, again, stop share screen. What did I just do? Here, okay. Share. Let me go here to Gemini. Who were the 4 convening powers at the San Francisco (1945) founding meeting of the United Nations? And okay, yeah. Oh, China was. France isn't there. I'm wrong. See, thank you, Gemini. It says it was United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, and China, but not France. Interesting. Haha. So China was a founding member. Okay. And of course, under the nationalists, the communists they did some fighting, but they didn't do most of the fighting against the Japanese during World War II. It was the nationalists, the Kuomintang, right? But I read one book, Popular History, said that the Japanese never really had trouble expanding their control in China. They overcame the nationalist resistance. But anyway, let's go back to the notes. So stop share, go back to the notes, share screen, like this. And so we go here, here, okay. They included 42 states, including India, which was not yet independent, but was going to become independent. So the charter included provisions that the international community in effect would formalize. The provision of the establishment of a central organ, that is the Security Council. Its members would be 9 countries, later expanded to 15. I think in the 60s. They expanded to 15. 5 permanent members with veto power would dominate it. It would be responsible for maintaining international peace and security. The provision on domestic jurisdiction with corresponds today with Article 2.7, focusing on the traditional principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states. So, yeah, there's a lot that's apparently potentially contradictory in the UN Charter. We've already looked a bit at the Charter. The language of the Charter is not complicated. The English is really like junior high level English. It's meant to be simple and vague. Why? Because it's a product of compromise, political compromise among these countries that have lots of disputes and concerns. They want to reach agreement, so they come up with vague, general, simple language to accommodate all of the conflicting interests. So, yeah, sovereignty is really important. Yeah, sovereignty is really important. But, you know, we also know that human rights are also important. So we say sovereignty is really important and you can't interfere in my internal affairs. But at the same time, we say we're going to be concerned about the human rights of people in all the member states of the United Nations. How do you reconcile that? Well, we'll work on that later. If the UN Security Council gets involved, then we're allowed, for example. So small and medium-sized states were able to make contributions, namely by establishing Article 51, the right to individual and collective self-defense. That's interesting, right? That's the famous Article 51. You can only use force to defend yourself, military force, to help defend yourself, or to help your neighbor or another country that's being aggressed, that's suffering aggression. Then you can intervene militarily to help them defend themselves. And that's what the Americans said about Kuwait when Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 1990 annexed Kuwait, claiming that Kuwait belonged to Iraq and and was unjustly separated by the British when it was part of the British Empire in 1961, and that should belong to Iraq, and that was British imperialism's crime against the Iraqi people, blah, 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 blah. And the Americans then said, well, we're fighting in self-defense of the self-defense of the Kuwaitis. That's a justification. That's in Article 51, that you can use force to defend somebody else being attacked. Small and medium-sized states also demanded the expansion of the competence of the UN General Assembly. It is the collective body in which every member state has 1 seat and 1 vote. The UN Charter empowers it to discuss any matter within the scope of the UN Charter, so pretty much anything. The UN Charter also empowers it to make recommendations on questions regarding peace and security with which the UN Security Council is not at the time addressing, as Articles 10 and 12 of the Charter express. So if the UN Security Council passes a resolution on issues of peace and security, Articles, I think, 6 and 7 of the Charter, then the UN General Assembly is not supposed to get involved. So the claim is that one suspicious claim is that maybe the US agreed that Israel should have ceasefire in Gaza because by being, quote, seized of the matter, let me ask Gemini. So go back to Gemini, share screen. What is the meaning in the UN Charter of the UN Security Council having exclusive jurisdiction when it declares it is seized of the matter? The concept of exclusive jurisdiction is complex when there's no single agreed meaning. You break down what it rules. Yeah. When the Security Council declares itself seized of the matter, it signifies that they are taking specific situation under their purview. This implies a degree of exclusive jurisdiction, but it doesn't mean they completely shut out other actors. Here's what it might mean, right? And so again, you often see that text in a UN Security Council resolution. You'll see that in the wording, because it means that the UN General Assembly is not supposed to be involved. Okay, so let me go back to the notes. So stop share. And I guess that's a legal term. I've seen it elsewhere, but we won't talk about that now. So they also, the small countries fought for the expansion of the competence of the General Assembly. It is, again, we already talked about that. So the General Assembly, Article 10, hooray! This is from, you get all this information on the internet. Article 10, the General Assembly may discuss any questions or any matters within the scope of the present charter or relating to the powers and functions of any organs provided for in the present charter, and except as provided in Article 12, may make recommendations to the members of the United Nations or to the Security Council or to both on any such questions or matters. Yay! Article 12, under Chapter 4, the General Assembly. While the Security Council is exercising in respect of any dispute or situation, the functions assigned to it in the present charter, the General Assembly shall not make any recommendation with regard to that dispute or situation unless the Security Council so requests. And Article 12, Section 2, the Secretary General, with the consent of the Security Council, shall notify the General Assembly at each session of any matters relative to the maintenance of international peace and security which are being dealt with by the Security Council, and shall similarly notify the General Assembly or the members of the United Nations if the General Assembly is not in session. Immediately the Security Council ceases to deal with such matters. Okay, so let's click on this just to show you these links work. I think they work. And so again, just to stop share and go here, and so you can see what this looks like. And so you can see, here is the UN Charter, hooray, Charter, Security Council, Peaceful Settlement of Disputes, and so all the different chapters. Okay, just to show you that that's there. So go back to stop share and go here. All right, the elevation of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, the rank of one of the principal organs of the new organization. So ECOSOC is one of the 6 principal organs of the new organization. ECOSOC has responsibility in the charter to promote cooperation, economic, social, educational, cultural, health, and related issues. The acceptance of provisions regarding colonial issues, the declaration regarding self-governing territories, which Article 73 contains, as well as provisions on the trusteeship system. So again, okay. And so it says here, Chapter 11, declaration regarding non-self-governing territories. All right, so here you can see this is Article 73. I don't know, do I want to go through this here? Again, just to show you, the decolonization was a highly contentious issue right at the end of the Second World War, because again, that's how France and Britain, in part, this is how France and Britain are claiming they're still top rank powers in the world because of their empire, their empires. And to give that up, they give it up because it costs too much to hold on to it, because there's more and more resistance, popular resistance, right? And it's really more and more expensive to keep formal imperial control of the British Empire. And so, again, the Cold War escalates. The Soviet Union is pointing at imperialism to explain why communism is better. And so the British Empire becomes the British Commonwealth. But there's a lot of concern, of course, in the 1940s about their empire and the French Empire. But again, the French, they're not even a convening power, right? This is the British Empire is really, and of course, the Soviet Union is already beginning to complain about the empire. Okay. Again, the Charter of the United Nations miscellaneous provisions under Chapter 16, Article 103. In the event of a conflict between the obligations of the members of the United Nations under the present charter and obligations under any other international agreement, their obligation of the present charter shall prevail. Which sounds like, since we're having a debate on Friday, right? Yoon Suk is going to debate me. The question is the United Nations the beginnings of the emergence of a world government? And so it says here, your obligation of the charter shall prevail over any other international obligation you may have, which means you should listen to the UN Security Council, because the UN Security Council and its resolutions, if they pass resolutions, they override any other obligation that the member states of the United Nations may have if they're in conflict. Okay? So a point of contention at the conference was the issue of non-intervention. It was a principle that was very important to Latin American and small powers. They intended to be placed in what became Article 2, Section 4, which bans use of force. So Charter of the United Nations, Charter purposes and principles. Hooray! Article 2, Section 1 through 5. The organization and its members, in pursuit of the purposes stated in Article 1, shall act in accordance with the following principles. The organization is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of all its members. So little Luxembourg, big China, you're all sovereign equal in sovereignty. Yay! All members, in order to ensure to all of them the rights and benefits resulting from membership, shall fulfill in good faith. Bona fides, good faith. The obligations assumed by them in accordance with the present charter. So you're not supposed to be using the UN system and UN language to promote your own particularistic interests at the expense of the well-being of the world. And you're supposed to convince everybody that you are in good faith attempting to resolve your disputes peacefully, with peace being number one among your fellow member states parties to the UN Charter. All members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means, in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. All members shall give the United Nations every assistance in any action it takes in accordance with the present charter, and shall refrain from giving assistance to any state against which the United Nations is taking preventative or enforcement action. Okay, and it goes on here. Okay, so what do I want to highlight here? So again, this proposal, it had enough support to include it, but the reluctance of the great powers led to a problematic compromise, which Article 2, Section 7 expresses. That is, state safeguards member states' domestic jurisdiction from unwanted interference by the organization. It is independent from the enforcement measures which UN Security Council decides. So, the great powers, they can't interfere in your internal affairs if they declare they're dealing with the issue because that threatens international peace. So if you're such a nasty government to your people that you're causing instability in your neighborhood, because maybe you're driving out thousands and thousands of refugees fleeing your brutal rule and government that's oppressing people, and those refugees are destabilizing politically their neighbors, then the UN Security Council, if it decides, can say, hey, what you're doing in your country is, you can't do that anymore. Why? Because you're threatening international peace and security. Who says? We say. The UN Security Council decides these things. It can decide anything if the 5 permanent members agree, which they're not doing anymore. They did for a while after the Cold War ended, right? So Soviet Union agreed to using force to push Iraq out of Kuwait in 1990 because the Soviet Union was too weak and was falling apart. So they didn't want to make enemies of the United States. So, okay, you can do that. We won't stop you. But that would begin to change. In 1999, Russia didn't want to support bombing Serbia to make it get out of Kosovo. And so the US in 1999, that was the end of the golden age that people were saying when the Soviet Union was leaving, was disintegrating, that, finally, the great powers, the Soviet Union, Russia, United States, China, they're cooperating. This is what we imagined back in 1945. that the great powers, the 5 permanent members, would get together and they would agree and they would address the world's problems and situations in Cambodia and in Africa. All right. And then in 1999, the United States and NATO decided they needed to make Serbia leave Kosovo because they were abusing the Albanians there. And Russia said, no, no. No, 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 no. Serbia is our friend. Serbia is trying to protect its territory. And it was backed up by China. And the Americans say, okay, F you, we're going to bomb them anyway. And we're going to do it under the NATO charter, the NATO North Atlantic Treaty Organization charter. And we're going to, and by the way, the UN charter says, it says that regional organizations should have primary responsibility for peace and security. So we're not violating the UN Charter because, number one, Russia and China are not acting in good faith. And you already passed all sorts of resolutions before in the UN Security Council warning Serbia, warning Serbia, warning Belgrade, and then you finally don't agree to invade, to stop Belgrade. So that's, we're acting in defense of the spirit of the UN Charter, to maintain the UN Charter, and Russia and China are not acting in bona fides. They're not acting in good faith. So we're not violating international law. No, countries never admit that they violate international law, even when they do violate international law. They never admit it, right? I mean, Russia doesn't admit that it's violating international law by attacking Ukraine. I mean, saying that, well, UN Charter says you can intervene, to protect, they don't say the UN Charter. I think they refer to customary international law, jus cogens. And that's even more important than treaty law, right? That genocide is illegal, always. And they claim that Ukraine was committing genocide against the Russian minority. And that's the king of crimes. That's part of jus cogens. So they acted. Just like the Americans acted in Kosovo in bombing Serbia, despite not having UN Security Council authorization. So to America. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. America bombed Serbia because of genocidal intentions in Kosovo. Oh, yeah? Well, we can do that too in Ukraine. You set the precedent, America. You did it in Kosovo, so we can do it in Ukraine. What do you say about that, America? What's good for the goose is good for the gander, as we say in American English. Gooses and a gander is a goose, if you don't know, right? Let's ask Gemini. Gemini. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. That's exactly right, Gemini says. It's an idiom that means people in similar situations should be treated the same way. So if America can bomb Belgrade without getting UN Security Council resolution to protect the Albanians, so Russia can bomb Ukraine without getting UN Security Council authorization to protect the Russians. Back to the notes. Since we only have 10 minutes, I don't know if I really want to do an exercise because, we're running out of time here. Article, so again, we already covered 1 through 5 here. So it says to 6 through 7. 7, nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the United Nations to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state, or shall require the members to submit such matters to settlement under the present charter. But this principle shall not prejudice the application of enforcement measures under Chapter 7, the famous Chapter 7, right? When the UN Security Council invokes Chapter 7, that means it can intervene in the country's internal affairs if it so decides to do so. So the great power founders of the new organization envisioned it as a political body that the great powers would dominate through the Security Council. Again, let's continue this cooperation that we developed in fighting Germany and Japan. Let's just make it permanent. And the UN Security Council will be the framework, the platform for continuing this cooperation. It would pursue these objectives. Yeah. Somebody have a question? Sorry. It would pursue these political objectives within a legal framework, but legal technicalities and judicial restraints would not limit if the great powers all agreed to action through the Security Council. Efforts to make interpretation of the UN Charter subject to the mandatory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice came up to a vote, but did not receive the necessary 2/3 majority to pass. So, okay, yeah, so it required 2/3 majority to pass, and it didn't get it. So the International Court of Justice exists, but technically you're supposed to agree to its jurisdiction as a member state. So again, that United States versus Nicaragua case that's mentioned over and over again in your book from 1984, I believe, it was a scandal because typically before then, the United States claims it's in favor of international law, right? That the United Nations had agreed that it would automatically accept the International Court of Justice's jurisdiction unless it decided not to. And it never did that until the 1980s, when Nicaragua sued the United States International Court of Justice because the United States was supporting the anti-communist guerrilla fighters, the Contras, the Sandinistas, against the Sandinista government that was in power and is still in power today. Well, it left power and it came back to power and stayed in power under Daniel Ortega. And the United States said, well, we revoke our agreement to be subject to the International Court of Justice. And everybody went, oh. And so I guess it means that unless the United States agrees formally, it can't be. Well, there's ways to get around it. The UN General Assembly can always ask the International Court of Justice opinion. So that's what happened in the case of Palestine. Israel, in other countries have not acknowledged the International Court of Justice jurisdiction regarding Gaza, but the UN General Assembly can ask the International Court of Justice for an opinion on Israeli policy in the Palestinian occupied Palestinian territories, the OPT. And so you can find a way for the ICJ to get involved through the General Assembly, for example. The goals and structure of the new organization, it says here, in the view of the founders of the United Nations, the organization with a capital O, the organization, was to pursue a number of fundamental purposes: to maintain peace and security, that's Article 1, Section 1, to bring about by peaceful means the adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace, to develop friendly relations among nations based upon respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. But self-determination was supposed to refer to the existing colonies, all right, and their borders. So self-determination of what? Well, what belonged to what had been Rhodesia, that becomes independent. You can't break up Rhodesia into separate states. You're not supposed to do that. So self-determination for existing colonial territorial communities as defined by their colonial borders. That's the principle of uti posseditis iuris, right? That self-determination refers to self-determination for colonial possessions as defined by the territorial borders. You're not supposed to break up those colonial territories according to the ethnic desires of different groups within them. It's a very controversial issue, right? At the time, this clause referred to the need to promote, if not yet the demise of colonial systems through a gradual and orderly process. Then to promote at least the slow awakening of colonial countries to self-government. So again, note at the time that at the San Francisco Conference, France and UK had large colonial empires. They are also to foster economic and social cooperation. That's Articles 1, Section 3, and then Article 55. To promote peace and security, human rights, and fundamental freedoms for all persons, Article 1, Section 3, and Article 55. For purposes of the organization, which the founders consider to be of minor importance, to promote disarmament and the regulation of armaments, according to Article 11, Section 1, and to promote further respect for international law, and that's in the preamble, right? And to encourage the progressive development of international law and its codification. And that's what the International Law Commission does, right? That we've talked about a bit already in the class. You know, it prepared the draft treaty on articles of state responsibility, which has been floating around for 23 years now, right? And that South Korea has a member on that commission. The United Nations has 6 principal organs, the 3 councils, that's which have more specialized functions because of a limited number of member states. That is the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, and the Trusteeship Council. Two organs composed not of member states, but of individuals. That's the Secretariat, the bureaucracy, and the International Court of Justice. And the United Nations Security Council is the most important political organ. But again, it's being immobilized because now Russia and China and the United States are vetoing each other's resolutions, right? The British and the French go with the Americans all the time. So we're back to the way the situation was during the Cold War in some ways. But again, this is before you were born. There was that time from 1989 to 1999 for 10 years where Russia didn't veto anything because it was too weak. And there was all sorts of excitement that, yes, the Security Council, it's working. It's finally working. Yay, yay. But not anymore. And so you could say, since then, the General Assembly and International Court of Justice become more important, right? Because of public opinion, global public opinion. Like, here's another statement to show you here. This person is also important for her research and study of human rights. So go here, and I think here, share, click on
the ruling by itself is not going to change things, certainly not on the ground. It's not going to end the Israeli genocide. It's not going to end the attacks on Palestinians. It's not, unfortunately, going to end the death and destruction of Gaza, which is now underway. It never would have, regardless of what decision they made. What it is doing is changing the basis on which we mobilize opposition and mobilize a global movement against that genocide. And it gives us a really important tool in our hands to use to convince the unconvinced, to win over those who are waffling. It's a huge gift, in a sense, for us. What makes it important is that it provides cover for governments who want to do the right thing, but are afraid of the consequences when the United States said, well, you can do what you want, but if you do that, you're going to lose access to our economic aid.
Okay, so you can watch the rest of it on your own if you want to. I'll of course, put the link in the lesson plan that I'll post. So any questions?
You didn't do the attendance.
Oh, no, I didn't. I forgot. I get so excited about teaching. Thank you for reminding me. So thank you. So we go to smart attendance, and your smart attendance number 627, 627. So let me put that in the chat. Where's the chat function? 627. So let me share screen. So 627. Thank you. I guess that's everybody. Okay? That's all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.